Hello, welcome. Today I am going to be talking about why paying um, everyone in the restaurant sector enough money is so difficult, who is currently working on solutions to the growing labor crisis in the United States, and how we can support changes to both the material conditions of restaurant workers and to the broader culture surrounding work in the United States. To start, let's try and define what makes an industry. The word usually indicates a collection of businesses or operations that run pretty much the same way, like coal mining or public accounting or any kind of manufacturing, um, or even a trade like welding or plumbing. They all have a standardized set of operations that make labor needs easier to see, and it makes it easier to mobilize a workforce around a set of standardized operations. So the variety of operations within the restaurant industry makes it a lot more difficult to achieve success using traditional strategies for labor reform, like sweeping wage increases in the form of policy mandates or governmental enforcement, because there is no standardization or economic infrastructure to support these efforts. So when we try and think about all of the different so when we try to think about all of the local restaurants in an area or in your own community, and try to visualize what each one might actually need to begin to pay their workers more, um, it becomes a lot more difficult to think of a one size fits all solution. Just in my neighborhood, on my like little main street strip, I have a neighborhood pub, a steakhouse, a coffee shop, a couple of delis, and then a bar, with a little in-house kitchen area. So, for the sake of this presentation, we'll stick to um, one fair wages definition of a livable wage, which we'll talk about a little bit later, which is a $15 an hour federal minimum wage for all restaurant workers with tips on top. So, a full service higher end steakhouse and raw bar has an entirely different operational structure and therefore an entirely different set of labor needs than a coffee shop or a deli. This brings us to this presentation's main argument, which is that this is both a policy issue and a cultural problem. Um, and despite the complicated relationship between, the way we've codified our cultural biases in this country, like racism, like our history of economic exploitation, of misogyny, and of classism and classist hierarchies, um, into policy, into service sector economic policy specifically, and into the structure of the way we um, deal with minimum wage and sub minimum wage, solutions must target both. So there are several organizations and individuals working to ensure livable, socially sustainable wages for restaurant industry workers. They all go about it from different angles, and they use different strategies to change both economic policy and certain cultural scripts around restaurant work. So both of these individuals, Mikey Nab on the left and Erica Palmer on the right, um, work with independently owned restaurants to raise labor standards and to enforce fair wage policies within independently owned restaurants. Each of them kind of operate within different sectors. Mikey is now working for the San Diego Office of Labor Standard and Enforcement, um, kind of working as a business liaison with the department, educating um, and trying to help increase compliance within the owner community in San Diego. And Erica Palmar founded the Independent Restaurant Coalition, co-founded it in 2020, and now kind of still works with the private sector um, for more of a labor, like from within the industry perspective.
The Independent Restaurant Coalition was founded in 2020, born out of the um, intense crisis of the global pandemic, and it helps secure national relief legislation that helps independent restaurants nationwide stay open. It now focused on helping independently owned restaurants sustainably solve the intensifying labor crisis, and it advocates for national reforms to immigration policy, to child care subsidies, um, and it helps independent owners access health insurance for their staff, and they do have tools um, for owners on how to offset the initial costs of transitioning to livable wages.
While the Independent Restaurant Coalition still primarily advocates for policy reform on a national and a state level. High Road Restaurants was founded as a subsidy program, a nonprofit subsidy program in 2021 as a potential solution to the pandemic exacerbated like racial and class hierarchies within the restaurant labor space. So it does offer comprehensive financial support on the conditions that a restaurant retrains the staff according to the high road restaurants equity and diversity training, and then they commit to paying one fair wage, which is again defined as $15 an hour minimum wage with tips on top um, to all employees within the restaurant, not just the servers or the cooks or the bussers, but everybody. Um, One Fair Wage is a national organization focused on securing one fair wage, which they define as $15 a federal $15 minimum wage for all service professionals with tips on top. It was founded with the express purpose of establishing livable wages for every person who works in food service, but they have since expanded their campaign to include all service workers, so including nail technicians, bartenders, baristas, barbers, salon professionals, people like that. And then the San Diego Office of Labor Standards and Enforcement is a really great example of a focal government trying to um, kind of establish and enforce labor standards for independent restaurants. Well, I certainly think that there is a place for broader policy advocacy campaigns as well as um, kind of enforcement of labor regulations and laws locally or regionally and keeping owners compliant. I think that that is a very important piece of this puzzle. I do think it's also important to just recognize how little information about livable wages are available to owners. And even if they would like to pay their workers more, there just are not many models out there to demonstrate that that's possible. So I think a key piece of this is going to be identifying what independent owners within a region actually need day to day. So maybe working with regional chapters of the IRC um, and maybe founders of similar regional organizations like Business for Good's Mikey Nab or Business for Good was a nonprofit that Mikey did found to set up public forums with local food service owners, workers, and economic policymakers to kind of get them all at the same table, um, who were all interested in the long term profit centered sustainability of a region's restaurant industry. So I think there is a bigger place for more informal work around changing our ideas about work and about which kind of work has value um, in a way that doesn't necessarily involve policy or changes to policy. I think these changes are going to have to come from more informal conversations um, within the restaurant industry and within, between people who work there. Um, and we're just going to have to get real about why we think about our sector's work the way we do and why we continually let it be undervalued and devalued. And coming to terms with the fact that, you know, we don't consider restaurant work to be valuable despite its growing it's rapidly growing in profitability and in size. Um, something's got to give. And I think a big opportunity for engagement here is just to keep this conversation going within restaurants and between owners and among regional restaurant communities. If somebody has not um, heard about the IRC, um, bring it up, mention it, link it, um, and just keep these organizations and this kind of work um, on the top of your to-do list, and kind of prioritize it um, in your own social circle.